In 1944, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer put out a movie called Gaslight. It's the story of a young woman named Paula, who was played by Ingrid Bergman, who moves into her murdered aunt's house in Victoria, London, with her new husband. Soon after, strange things begin to happen, such as missing pictures, strange footsteps she's hearing in the night, and the gaslights that dim for no reason. As the story unfolds, Gregory, Paula's husband, begins to manipulate her, telling her she isn't well, claiming that letters that she swore that she has read in the past that have gone missing, and in fact, he insisted they never existed. She begins to mentally deteriorate and eventually even question her own sanity. The climax of the movie reaches its height when Paula discovers a letter that reveals the real identity of her husband, the letter she swore that she had read at some point in the movie previously, and discovers that he was the one that actually murdered her aunt, thereby claiming her trust in her own experience and validating that she is not crazy. Now, this is where we get the term gaslight from, and it's what we're going to talk about today. Is my partner gaslighting me? Let's get started.
Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast that provides support and guidance to help heal the wounds of attachment trauma. Whether you find yourself struggling with unresolved issues in the past or have experienced trauma in your current relationship, our goal is to provide accurate, scientifically informed information as well as the tools to help you create a secure connection between you and your partner. And here's your host, Tom Philp.
Okay. Gaslighting is a term that has come to mean someone is questioning one's own reality. A formal definition by Webster is a psychological manipulation of a person, usually over an extended period of time, that causes the victim to question the validity of their own thoughts, perception of reality, or memories, and typically leads to confusion, loss of confidence and self-esteem, uncertainty of one's emotional or mental stability, and a dependency on the perpetrator. One of the key indicators that stand out to me in this definition is the word manipulation, which implies intentionality, intentionally manipulating somebody with malice. Someone is intentionally manipulating you when you begin to question your own reality. Now, before we unpack gaslighting much further, I want to talk about what gaslighting is not. And I want to distinguish it from what it is. So to start with, gaslighting is not your partner having a different interpretation of events than you. And it is not them remembering the events differently from the way you remember them. I've mentioned this many times, but I see couples come in and they will have experienced the same event, but their interpretation and their experience of that same event is quite different. An example might be if you and I were to look at a wingback chair, we might see that chair together. We might agree on even the color of that chair, but one of us might determine that that chair is terribly uncomfortable, and so our experience of that chair might be different than the other. And for the other person, they might say, oh, that's one of the most comfortable chairs I've ever slept in. Now, we can get bogged down into whose version of that is correct, but that is not gaslighting. That is simply having two different experiences of the same event. And so gaslighting is not your partner trying to communicate to you their thoughts or feelings that are different than yours. They're just trying to share their experience that may happen to differ from yours, but they are not gaslighting you in that sense, especially if they're not putting pressure on you, especially if they are not trying to convince or coerce you that their version of reality is correct and yours is false. Now, to be fair, when we start talking about some personality disorders, especially things like narcissism and borderline, there is an aspect to these individuals that are afflicted with this disorder that they have to have versions of reality align with their interpretations of it. So there is a amount of pressure at times where narcissists and borderlines can put pressure on their partners to accept only one version of reality. And so there are examples out there that of where couples will do that, especially if one of them is afflicted with a personality disorder. So I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I'm just trying to delineate and clarify here that your partner that might remember something differently or not remember a conversation, because I've certainly seen plenty of that too. Remember when we talked about, no, I don't remember that. You don't remember when I said this? No, I have no memory of that. They're not gaslighting you. They're just simply experiencing something different. And so the thing that's most important for me to consider is, how is my trauma impacting the interpretation and or memory of the event? Because if my partner is not intentionally gaslighting me, then I need to consider and be able to reflect on, is my trauma filtering the interpretation of this event in a certain way that's preventing me from being able to hear my partner? Or does it feel like my partner is intentionally manipulating me, intentionally trying to make me believe that my version of reality is not as such? And I think along with that comes the idea that we can have multiple interpretations. Part of maturity, I think, is being able to recognize that there are multiple versions of an event that can exist in terms of subjective experience. Let me go back to my example of the chair. We may both see that that is a chair, and that may be a green chair, and we can agree that that is called a chair, that piece of furniture is named a chair, and we may agree that that color is green, although even sometimes people can see that differently, but we might agree that that's a green chair. So that's sort of objective reality. But then the subjective piece of it comes in, where one person looks at that and goes, I don't like the style, I don't like the shape, it's not very comfortable. And the other person says, oh, I love it, I sit down, I read, I take naps, that's one of my favorite chairs in the whole house. So we can have a different subjective experience of that. But objectively, there are certain things that we have agreed on as a culture, and that is that when you have a piece of furniture that is shaped like a chair, we call that a chair. And so if your interpretation of event is being heavily skewed from your partner's, I encourage you to reflect at how might my past trauma, past wounds, past hurts be interfering with my interpretation of the events here. And I see this a lot in the area of trust. People that that have been wounded in the past and have a difficult time trusting their partners, even if their partner says, I love you, you're important to me, this relationship is important to me, I want to make you happy, I want to love you the way you can feel it. Then I hear people sometimes say, yeah, I hear the words and that's nice, but I don't know if I completely trust it. That might be an example how your trauma might come up in a situation where you might interpret your partner a little bit differently, and to try to be able to recognize that. So to me, again, gaslighting is all about intentionality. Is your partner intentionally trying to manipulate you to get you to see that there's only one version of reality and that version is their version? Or are they trying to convince you that something did not happen when it did? And they're putting pressure on you. And I've been in the company of people that have certain personality disorders and this terrible affliction, actually. And there's something that's off with them. There's something that you can just sense that's like, wow, there's something really different here, that in this communication and the way this person's seeing this, that I'm feeling pressure. I'm feeling like I have to conform to their version of reality, or something is wrong with me, or something's going to blow up. We're going to have a huge fight, or I'm going to feel even more pressure, or whatever that may be, whatever the consequence of that might be. And so you can imagine that over time, where you have somebody in your life that's putting pressure on you to perceive reality only through their lens, that would eventually certainly feel like gaslighting. So with that in mind, we kind of have a clearer understanding of what gaslighting is and what it is not. Let's talk about what some signs of manipulation are, since that's the sort of the key word we're honing in on: intentionally manipulating you. Well, if someone is lying repeatedly, that is a type of manipulation. If they are discrediting you, especially in front of others. So do they downplay what you say, or try to explain it as if you aren't able to talk for yourself, and explain things and have your own feelings and opinion? If they often discredit you, especially in public, then that could be a form of gaslighting. Do they minimize your thoughts and feelings? Oh, that's not important. Oh, you shouldn't focus on that. Oh, that's not a big deal. You shouldn't feel that way. What about if they're shifting blame? And we see this a lot, where they will turn things around. Oh, well, you do this. What about that? Oh, well, you did this not too long ago. So on and so forth. So they're not able to even address what the actual topic of conversation is, but they're constantly deflecting that, and blame shifting. What about denying wrongdoing? Nope, didn't happen. Didn't do it. Wasn't me. Wasn't there. Just flat out denying it. No matter what, they refuse to deny it. And then, of course, the last one is rewriting history. Well, it didn't happen like that. Well, you got to remember that this was part of that. And so there's a bigger context here, and it's not really like you saw it. It's not really the way it was. It's really more like this. So they begin to rewrite history. Those are some types of manipulation, intentional manipulation, that might look like or feel like gaslighting in your relationship. And so, what are some signs of being gaslit? Meaning, if I was being gaslit, what might I think or feel that might lead me to question or ponder whether I was being intentionally manipulated or not? Well, one of the things is you question your own feelings and reality. So you really begin to question, to go, gosh, am I crazy? Did I not? I really thought I had read that, or I really know what happened. But boy, my partner's telling me it just didn't happen that way. So you begin to question your own feelings. Am I really upset? Do I really feel mad and angry, or am I just making a big deal out of this? My partner tells me I've got trauma, and they think this my trauma that's coming up here. Or do I have a legitimate reason to be angry? And so you can see over time, if you start to question that over and over, you might begin to develop a belief about yourself that's not consistent with your own experience. Again, you might question your own judgment and your own perception. Am I really reading that event correctly? Is my judgment accurate here? I don't know. I've told so many times my judgment is off. I just I'm not sure I'm a good judge of character. I'm not sure I'm a good judge of what really happens. And so sometimes it's best if I just don't say anything, or I don't want to lead to any kind of judgment. So I'm just going to let this person sort of do what they want to do, so that I don't misjudge them. How about feeling vulnerable or insecure? And certainly this is the whole dependence piece, where somebody that's intentionally gaslighting you, and you begin to convince yourself and not trust yourself, and you begin to doubt yourself. Then what happens? You become more dependent on that person to define reality for you. And so you begin to feel more vulnerable and more insecure. You begin to feel more alone and powerless around this particular person. So one of the things you can ask yourself, and I see this with couples all the time, is they get bogged down into, well, if you had just told me, if you'd said this word, or if you had said that, then I might have responded differently. Now, I don't consider something like that to be gaslighting, because what they're trying to say is that you were actually coming at me with a lot of emotion and I couldn't hear what you were really trying to communicate. So it's the emotional disconnection that they're trying to articulate there to their partner, but they want to get bogged down into, well, if you just said this word. And so what happens is the person begins to feel sort of powerless, like, well, I've got to walk in eggshells all the time and I never know what's going to set you off. And then finally, the last one is you begin to guess yourself, a second guess yourself, pardon me. And you begin to think, well, man, if I don't use the right words, I don't know how to communicate with my partner. And so all these things, I think, can begin to accumulate in a person in a relationship if they are being intentionally manipulated. And certainly, if you begin to feel this way over time, consistently in your relationship, and you're starting to see some of those signs that I mentioned previously about repeated lying, discrediting, minimizing your thoughts and feelings, shifting blame, denying wrongdoing, rewriting history, then at the very least, let me say, you are probably not in a safe relationship. And at the very least, I think you need to ask yourself, how could I ever be secure and get my attachment needs met if I'm not in an emotionally safe relationship? So ultimately, gaslighting is about power and control. And if you find that these behaviors exist in your relationship, then I would strongly suggest, as I just did, that at the very least you are in an unsafe relationship. And no one deserves to be in a relationship where they feel unsafe for any reason. So we've kind of partitioned here what gaslighting is and what gaslighting isn't. And so I just want to talk about what are some next steps. What if you feel like, yeah, Tom, you've really articulated today what I think I'm experiencing in my relationship. So what can you do about that if you find yourself in this type of relationship? Well, the first thing I would tell you is go seek some help. An experienced therapist will be able to help you determine whether you are truly being gaslit or not. Is this sort of intentional and manipulated? Is it about power and control? Or is your partner just simply having a different experience than you, and you guys are just stuck and not being able to come together over a similar event or events in the relationship? Second thing you can do is learn to set boundaries and then ask yourself, how does your partner respond when you do set boundaries? If you need a break or you need some space or you want to slow some things down, how does your partner respond to that? Do they get more upset? Do they apply more pressure? Do they wig out and throw a hissy fit, so to speak? I mean, what kind of reaction, if you set boundaries with your partner in your relationship, does your partner have? Are they able to respect those boundaries? Are you able to explain it to them in a way where they can understand, hey, right now, this is just something that I need that is important for me in this relationship. Can you respect this boundary? A mature person that values you, that wants you to feel safe in a relationship, will respect those boundaries. Now, it may cause them to set some of their own boundaries, and that's okay. We could have a whole nother different conversation about that. But if you see that through their behavior and words that they respect that boundary, then you're probably not dealing with someone who's intentionally trying to manipulate you or have more power or control over you, because they're not putting more pressure in words or behavior for you to break that boundary. Third, get an outside perspective. So go to a trusted friend or a family member and say, I'm finding this happens over and over in my relationship. Am I crazy here, or does this seem like it's an unsafe thing? And so get somebody's perspective. Now, be careful about who you go to, because I want you to go to somebody that is not just going to be a yes, ma'am, or no, no, ma'am, or yes, sir, or no, sir, and tell you what you want to hear. So go to somebody that you feel like is somewhat emotionally and mentally healthy and stable, and is going to be able to give you some kind of reasonable perspective, even if it's a perspective you don't necessarily want to hear. Even if they say, yeah, I don't think you're being gaslit, but certainly I think there's an issue here or there. Or, yeah, it feels like maybe you're playing into this a little bit or reading into this a little bit too much. So feedback's hard to hear, especially when it's about us. But what you're really wanting here is some sort of outside perspective so that you can know, is this really intentional manipulation that's going on inside my relationship? And then in the most extreme of situations, you can end the relationship. And I don't take this lightly when I say this, because I really believe in the power of relationships. And I believe that a lot of couples end it too early, even though I get and understand that they're wanting out of the pain and the hurt and the confusion and the frustration and all that comes with ending a relationship. But in some cases, it is only appropriate to end a relationship when it is unsafe for you. If you are emotionally unsafe in a relationship, if you feel like your partner's experience and the things they're saying and doing do not jive with your own experience of what you want and need, then I think you have to take that necessary step. Don't do so lightly. Give it lots of thought. Don't do so on a whim. You want to make sure that you sleep on it many nights. Get some outside perspective. By all means, go see a licensed, experienced therapist to help you determine if that's a step you should take. But in some cases, that is what is appropriate, especially anyone who has a history of trauma, because your need for safety in a relationship is so paramount. It's so absolutely essential. Being unsafe in a relationship can be re-traumatizing in and of itself, and can stir up feelings of crazy making. It can make you begin to think that you're going through the trauma again, and that all those feelings start to come back, and it can further complicate the situation. So I hope this was helpful today. A little bit of an unusual topic, is my partner gaslighting me? But I think important nonetheless, because I often hear this term, and I really want to separate out for us what real gaslighting is versus sometimes what our partner's just trying to convey to us that looks like just a different experience without the intentional manipulation. Hey, I really hope you liked this podcast today. I hope this was helpful. As always, feel free to reach out and let me know what you like, what you don't like, what you might want to hear more of. And until next time, we'll talk to you then.
Thank you for listening to Trauma Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.